Welcome back everybody to another GB Studio tutorial. If you don't know what GB Studio is, then it lets you make Game Boy games that you can actually play on your original Game Boy. You can also make Game Boy Color games, and you can also export to the Analog Pocket. So in this video we're going to be making a tile set in GIMP. This is a free open source image editor. I use it because it's very similar to Photoshop, but it's free. We're also going to be using Tiled. Tiled lets you take your tile set that you created in GIMP or whatever else a program you used, and then create maps by painting down the tiles, and it makes life much easier than doing it in something like GIMP or Photoshop. I'll then show you how you can turn those tile sets into backgrounds and then put those backgrounds into GB Studio, and then you walk around them with your character. I am using the latest version of GB Studio. It's version 3.0.2, I think. That fixes some bugs from the previous versions, but there are still bugs that are known, so remember to update your GB Studio when you can. So first things first, we're just going to jump into GIMP here, and we're going to create a new document, and I'm just going to put it to 256 by 256. The Game Boy uses 8 by 8 tiles, so you need this to be a multiple of 8. So if I now turn on the grid, I also need to configure the grid into the 8 by 8. And you can now see it's populated the screen with the tiles that we can then use to draw our tiles on. So in the documents of GB Studio, there is some information about backgrounds. For example here, these are the 4 colors you need to use. The thing with GB Studio is you're technically creating a game for the original Game Boy. So when you import a background, it needs to have these colors. And then once you've got the map in, you see here we're using this sample town thing, 56 by 56 tiles. It's green, right? And if I was to turn off color mode, it would go back to green. You see this? It's back to green. If I turn it back on, then we get color again. We get the color from painting down these palettes in the scene, rather than painting it on the actual tile set or in the background image. So with these colors lined up here, we can draw some stuff, right? So what I'm actually going to do is delete this background. I'm going to create a new layer with this button down here, and we want it to be a layer with nothing on it. So we're just going to create this, and it's going to fill with transparency here. So now we have a transparent layer. We can then create stuff like grass and water. Okay, so the grass we want to be a block, obviously. So each of these tiles will be its own different grass, and I will paint on some different, grasses to add some variety. Make sure they're not all at the same angle. I mean, making sure they're not all at the same height, because otherwise then it might look like they're on a row or something. But obviously you can do whatever you want. Okay, so that's our grass, and then I'll make some water. I'm going to try and make this look like Pokemon or Zelda, where we have some kind of angle that we're viewing this at. So I'll just quickly, make something and then show you how we could give it some perspective. So as you can see, if we were to tile this across, then it would all line up perfectly. It's not very interesting. There's no cutouts or anything, but that's the kind of stuff you can add once you've got the foundations of your tile set in, and you want to add some variation. So knowing that this is a green here, I'm going to use some green here, and I'm going to create like an edge, like a boundary, as if there is an edge to this. I could even increase this a bit more, maybe even a bit more, just to give it some shape. And now at the bottom, I'm going to use a black line. And often black lines are used to denote between different shapes entirely. So if we can imagine this being sat on the grass, then it would go from light to dark to light, implying that there's a wall there. and there's no cut or there's no overlapping of anything. It's all blends into one, right? But with here, if we were viewing it from this side, then the black line would obviously be here. Or imagine that this whole chunk here is condensed into this black line, and it creates the harsh cutoff between the grass, which will obviously be under this where the transparent is, and the light of which the water is, right? So hopefully that makes some sense as to why I've done it like this, and we hopefully will see this and what it looks like in the game. So we'll now have something for the player to walk on, something for the player to, have maybe like a world boundary or something along those lines. We kind of want some things that we can scatter around the world and create boundaries with, so let's try and make some rock. So if the grass is the light green, we probably want to use the black and the dark green as the rocks, as the predominant colors in the rocks, because this probably will be sat on grass. So if I make it a dark green and I put maybe a shadow under it, I haven't done this before, but it sounds like a fun idea. Now we have a boulder. And the shadow might be a nice, cool effect, but we'll have to see. I haven't done this before. And also we want some highlights on it, so I'm using the white, add some highlights. And I'm not really caring too much, because obviously this is a tutorial, and we haven't actually seen what it looks like next to our player. Seeing it next to the player is the most important thing. So obviously you probably want to design your character first and get the controls down with that before you actually start this stuff. But obviously we have a little character. We created him a couple episodes back where I was showing you guys the sprite editor, and obviously it might change, but I do like this kind of style where the head is a 1 tile wide and high, and we have like the little pieces of the body. I kind of like that. And plopping him into the game world, he's 2 tiles, maybe 2.5 tiles tall. So imagine him next to this rock. He would be about the same size as the rock. But we do want some kind of wall or something to block the player. So I'm just going to create just a single tile, and I'm going to block it off and add some cracks in it so it looks a bit like a rock. And I'm not even going to care about how it tiles. Normally you would want to put it next to itself in order to see what it looks like when it tiles, but I'm not going to do that because we're just testing for now, and I'm obviously just showing you how you would go about doing this. So I'm just going to cut this. I'm going to move it up here so it's a bit more confined. I'll move these across. Fantastic. And now what you want to do is obviously you want to save it as whatever you want to save it as, and then we want to export it as a PNG. The reason why we want to export it as a PNG is so we have the transparent background, and also PNGs are lossless, so you don't actually lose any data when you use them and save them and whatever. So now I've just jumped over to Tiled. What I'm going to do is create a new tile set, and it's going to be based on an image, obviously. And I'll obviously find that image, and I've just found it here, so I'm going to call it tileset tutorial. I'll call it tileset tutorial. And then obviously we want the tile width to be 8 and the tile height to be 8. That's extremely important. Just like we set it up in GIMP, you want to make sure that Tiled is also using 8x8. So then press save as, you save it into a good place, and then here it opens up, and you can see if we zoom in top corner, here are tiles. So there are obviously things you can do, and I have made tutorials on this before. What we're going to do now is create a new map. And the screen size of GB Studio is 20 tiles by 18 tiles. So unless you want your map to be the same size as that, I recommend increasing it to maybe 40 by 40. So we'll just press save as. And now what we can do is zoom in here. You see I'm highlighting all of the grass tiles, and I'm just going to click on this randomize button up here and get the fill tool. As you can see, it's now randomizing as I move my cursor around with the placement of all of these 4 things. So what I'm actually going to do before that is I'm going to go in here, I'm going to right click on this tile here, and I'm going to increase the probability to 10. And what that should mean is that it's way more probable that this comes up than these, because I want the grass to be less common, like the little dark green bits to be less common than the actual light green. And if we take a look at that, you can see that there's a lot of green, of just green tiles, and less of the normal grass. And this is just so that it doesn't look like exactly randomized. It actually looks like there's some priority given to the normal tiles. Obviously, you might not want to do that. You might want to actually prioritize a certain tile, but that's what I want to do. So this is on obviously tile layer 1. I'm just going to call this grass. I'm going to create a second layer. I'm going to call it water. And then as you can see, if we randomize now, it doesn't really work. And I could do this thing here where I create a new terrain, and then on this terrain I call this water. And then what I want to do is draw this. And now if I go back to this, we can go into terrains at the bottom here and get the water, and then we can paint this. There will obviously be problems because we haven't set it up exactly for this usage, but it should do the job for now, especially if we go in with the actual tile set thing and fix it up. As you can see, just drawing it actually it does basically what you wanted of filling in here. And there will be rules that we don't actually yet have for this tile set. So as you can see, I have to make more of a block than anything else. On these indent corners, it just doesn't work. But that should not matter that much, because it's just a test. It's just a test. Okay, so we now have a little body of water. Obviously there are some things missing, but we're just testing, so we don't care. Create a new tile, and I'll call this boundary. And now on the boundary, I can take the rock thing I made, and I can use, for example, this rectangle tool, and I can just draw in around all the edges the boundary. So this will be so the player knows they can't escape. And I'll just, with the clone stamp tool, I can just come in and make some more interesting shapes in order to make it not look so, rectangular, basically. Obviously, you don't have to do any of this. You can, if you're making a different kind of game, you might not even need to use tiled. You might just want to make it all freehand yourself, knowing that there is a limit on the amount of tiles you can use. As you can see here, I've used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. But the thing with this, it's not just 14 tiles, it's 14 tiles have been used in this thing. But you see here, this is technically a unique tile because this isn't on here, right? So that would be a 15. This will be a 16, right? So you need to think about where your tile layers interact. They do create unique tiles. It's not as simple as just, oh, I only got 14 things, but yeah. So we now have boundaries, and also if we use the eraser tool up here, we can maybe create a path through here just to give the player an exit or entry. And now we have a map, so we called it map 1, I'll just save it. And then I'm going to export it as an image. And I'm going to put it into the assets folder of this, of the project of the game. So we go into assets, we go into backgrounds, and now you can see here, this is all the sample project stuff, and we just want to save it in. So export into it, and now go over to GB Studio. We press S to open up or to add a new scene. Then as you can see, it actually automatically brings in the map because this is the last one it was known to have. So map 1, see here. So now what we can do is use the paint bucket tool, and we can paint it green. And if we want the water to be blue, then we can go into the palettes here. So what I'm going to do is create a palette, And then the palette will be, it will use the green. Actually, I'll name it first. So you see here, now I've renamed it to the bottom here. I just copied the green from the grass. I'm going to paste it right there. We want to give the water, the light color, some actual blue tones. So let's do this. The dark green, we can keep that as the same green as this green. And then I'm going to make the darkest actually black, just because I like the darkness, the rich dark of this black. So now we can change this palette here. Go all the way to the bottom, see tutorial, water on grass. And now if we paint with this tool here, making sure we're selecting the correct palette, we can now paint that blue down on here. And you see it's very simple to do this. So I may also want to change the palette of the rocks. So obviously I just chose one that looks more grayish, called Elephant. And this is where some things can get annoying because it's so fiddly and you got such huge maps that there's no like fill to tile button or anything. That would be great. But unfortunately I don't think that exists yet. So I'll just fill all of this in and then I'll show you what you can do next. Okay, so I just filled all of the boundary edges, so now I'm just going to get the fill bucket tool and then just fill it all in. Okay, so almost forgot, we need to add the collision. So unfortunately you can't add collision to color either, so we have to go around exactly the same as what we just did and make sure the collision is stopping us. Okay, so on the water we also want the boundary, unless we want the player to be able to walk in the water. So maybe you do, maybe you don't. So I'm obviously going to take the choice of no, we don't. Instead, we could have, for example, a trigger. We could put a trigger in the water, which makes the character speed, the actor movement speed. Maybe we set it to slow, and then when we leave, for example, we can make it we can put the player's speed back to whatever it starts on. We can just click off of everything and see what the movement speed starts with. So if movement speed is 1, when they leave it, but when they enter it, it goes to half. So the idea is you walk slower in water than you do on land, which would make sense, but would also require you to have some complex, you know, some complex triggers here. You see how this, I'm not sure how overlapping triggers doing the same function changes anything. It might have some unforeseen circumstances that you might have to design the map directly around the idea of the water being boxes, but that's something for you to test out if that's something you would want to do. Okay, so we now have a new map here with boundary set. So what I'm going to do is click off of everything, and I'm going to change the starting scene to this scene. And you can see the start is actually down here, so I'm just going to drag it up. I'll put it here. I'll make the player start facing left. And then when we press play, we should begin in this level, and we can just walk around and have a look. Another thing I didn't do is set the sprite palette. So the player character is using these sprite palettes in order to color itself the correct colors. So I will have to copy that over. I press play before I fix that, so when it does load, it won't actually have those colors. If you would want to add scenes, like moving between scenes, you see here, I've got on enter, I just add a change scene, and then I would obviously want to drag this bit here into the scene I want to go into, right? So the idea is on enter of this trigger, when you enter the trigger, you get put and changed to this scene. And then obviously you would have another trigger, for example this, where instead of it giving you to there, it actually sends you to here. And obviously you'd want to make sure that you've set up each of these sprite palettes correctly in order for the player to stay consistent as they move between scenes. So here we are in our new scene. Obviously, like I said, the palettes are the default ones because I pressed run too soon. But as you can see, we're now walking around. We got the boundaries. Let's check them out. Yep. Obviously, this kind of does show that we might want to change how our sprite is sat in the sprite sheet so that they're maybe more close to the ground, but to the bottom of the tile, sorry. But I do think it works pretty well. As you can see, we kind of overlap slightly the background, which is good. Fantastic. So as you can see, that's how you create backgrounds from tile sets and then import them into GB Studio and have your character move around them. So remember that the scene type is top-down 2D. That's what lets you do all the movement and everything. And it will use the basic character that's set up in the settings unless you change it. Obviously, in my video about the sprite editor, I use the test character here, and it lets you change that to whatever you want it to be. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I'll put my Patrons up on the screen right now. Thank you so much to you guys. Remember to like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment on what you want to see next and what you follow this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.